YouTube fam! I'm so excited to welcome you all back for another episode of Crime and Wine. And if you're new here, then my name is Ariona, or Ari to the YouTube fam, and I cover true crime stories that have inspired the making of movies.
What is this place?
Previous owner built a bomb shelter. I made some improvements. Oh, put that end over there. And here we go. What do you think?
I mean, kind of sucks. There's no windows.
You don't like it?
Dad,
That's too bad.
what are you doing? Dad? Dad? What are you doing? Dad! Dad! Let me out!
I missed you all, especially after taking a week off, which I'm so sorry for, but we are here and we're back up and running with a very interesting and dark case for today. So without further ado, grab your wine and let's get into it. Today's case is focused on the Lifetime movie called The Girl in the Basement. This movie was released in 2021 and has a very shocking storyline. But it's even more shocking because the movie is actually based on an extremely horrendous true crime case. As if we haven't covered other crazy stories on this channel, I would personally say this one is definitely the most, or pretty high up there in being the most unsettling, shocking, and disturbing cases I've read through. We'll begin by diving into a man named Josef Fritzl. Josef Fritzl was born on April 9th in 1935 in Amstetten, Austria, and in 1956, when he was 21 years old, he married 17-year-old Rose Marie. From then on, they had 7 children together, 3 sons and 4 daughters. Josef studied mechanics and electronic technology, where he ended up turning the basement of his house into his workshop, but this basement would actually turn out to be a hellhole for one of his own children, Elizabeth Fritzl. Elizabeth was born on April 6, 1966 in Amstetten, Austria. She is the 4th of 7 children to Rosemarie and Joseph. On August 28, 1984, at age 18, Elizabeth went missing, and her mother, Rosemarie, filed a missing persons report frantically trying to find her. But when the policemen came to the house, Joseph told them that he had no idea where she would go, but that it's likely she joined a religious cult because she had talked about doing that before. This, however, was nowhere near the truth. In fact, Joseph knew exactly where she was at. While her mother was left thinking the worst about her and still trying to find her daughter, she never in a million years would have guessed her own daughter was just about 20 feet below her in her own home. In fact, weeks later, after she initially went missing, her mother would receive a letter from Elizabeth that said she had grown tired of her family and decided to run away. On August 28th of 1984, Joseph called his daughter Elizabeth into the basement of the family's home. He got her down there by asking her for help in carrying something heavy, and she agreed, but when she got inside the final room that he had led her to, Joseph forced Elizabeth inside, knocking her unconscious, and locked her inside. Without anyone knowing about this, Fritzl had spent several years building a small section of the basement into living quarters, specifically for his own teen daughter. He got a permit for the space, which Austrian officials had inspected and approved. The excavated space had narrow hallways that connected several rooms. He even added a small bathroom as well as a refrigerator, a hot plate, and a bed. The basement was not temperature controlled. There were only 2 ways to access the covert area, and Fritzl hid both in his workshop, which he secured with a series of 5 locked doors. The space was 80 square meters, with a maximum height of 170 centimeters and spanned the entire garden. To access it, he placed a 300-kilo concrete sliding door hidden behind a bookcase. It was passable by a code known only to Fritzl, and the enclosure consisted of an entrance, 2 bedrooms of 3 square meters, a small kitchen, a bathroom, and a laundry room. The only source of ventilation came from a tube. I think that's so crazy. I can't even imagine how nobody in his family, keep in mind he had 7 children in total, and a wife, how nobody ever realized that he was fully renovating this basement, but I guess because it was for work, they didn't think much of it, but still is crazy to me. It was on this day of August 28th, 1984 that Elizabeth would then never see the outside world until 24 years later. The things she went through and the events that took place within those 24 years, they're just horrendous. He chained his daughter up, strapped up her arms, and tied her hands behind her back with an iron chain, which he then secured to metal posts behind her bed. She could only move maybe approximately a half a meter on either side of the bed. And then after 2 days, he gave her more freedom of movement by attaching the chain around her waist. Then, around 6 to 9 months into her imprisonment, he removed the metal chain because, quote, it was hindering his sexual activity with his daughter. By the second day of her imprisonment, Elizabeth's own father began to sexually abuse and rape his daughter, where this would continue right up until she was freed, more than 2 decades later. He repeatedly threatened her with the statement, quote, "If you do not do as I say, your treatment will get worse and you will not escape from the cellar anyway." From multiple reports I've read, which is different than the depiction of the movie, it was said that she was already being sexually abused by her father since she was just 11 years old. It's unclear to me though whether her mother or siblings knew about this or if she had ever tried to tell anyone. But he would rape her daily, if not multiple times in one day, and I know what you might be thinking because I asked the same question. What did his wife and family really think he was doing so much in the basement? Didn't anyone think it was weird how often or how long he'd stay down in the basement? From one article I read, apparently as far as the rest of the Fritzl family was concerned, Josef would head down to the basement every morning at 9 a.m. to draw plans for the machines that he sold. Occasionally, he would spend the night down there, but his wife wouldn't worry. Her husband was a hard-working man and was thoroughly dedicated to his career. Now, as if the fact that her father kidnapped her, keeps her captive within her own home, and sexually abuses her wasn't bad enough, it just gets much worse. Just 2 years after being held captive in the basement of her own home, Elizabeth actually became pregnant. And yes, by her own father. She actually miscarried this child just 10 weeks into the pregnancy, but ended up becoming pregnant yet again 2 years later on August 30th of 1988, and she gave birth to a baby girl named Kirsten. She did not receive any prenatal care while imprisoned in the basement of their family home. Instead of providing her with proper medical supplies for the birth, Fritzl gave her a book on childbirth that was written in the 1960s, a bottle of disinfectant, and towels. Fritzl was not present for the birth because he found the process distasteful. Another 2 years later, Elizabeth fell pregnant again and she birthed another baby, this time a boy, which she named Stefan on February 1st. She had yet another child, Felix, on December 16, 2002, who all stayed inside that captivity with her. The story gets crazier and crazier. Something that stands out about this case is the idea of the upstairs and downstairs children. So basically, Elizabeth fell pregnant a total of 8 times throughout the 24 years she was held captive by her father. The first child she miscarried, 3 of the kids stayed with her in the basement, and surprisingly, 3 more of her kids ended up living and being raised upstairs by their grandmother and, well, father/grandfather. The 3 children that lived upstairs was Lisa, born on August 29th of 92, Monica, who was born on February 26th of 94, and Alexander, who was born on April 28th of 1996. Josef would force Elizabeth to write letters to her mother stating that she had given birth to a child but could not support her child and wanted her to take care of her children. In order to conceal what he was doing from Rosemary, his wife, Josef staged elaborate discoveries of the children, often involving placing them on or in bushes near the home or on the doorstep. Each time the child would be swaddled neatly and accompanied with a note allegedly written by Elizabeth claiming that she couldn't take care of the baby and was leaving it with her parents for safekeeping. I'm not exactly sure what made him pick and choose which kids or how many would go upstairs, but one article I read said it was because those specific 3 were quote unquote crybabies and he didn't want them drawing attention down there. And in another article it said they were just simply running out of room downstairs in the very small cellar in the basement. Joseph frequently threatened Elizabeth as well as brainwashed them and instilled fear in not only Elizabeth but also the kids as they got older by telling them if they tried to leave or escape, they would be gassed or that they would be electrocuted if they tried to meddle with the doors, which none of this was ever true. Joseph would bring them weekly rations of food and water, which he would also use this as a form of punishment as well, where he would withhold food and water and sometimes even the little electricity that they had. Joseph would also take holiday trips, which some of his friends had actually recalled once when they holidayed in Thailand. They saw him picking out a glittery evening dress and lingerie at a market, but it was obviously way too small to have been for his wife. And I guess he realized they saw him getting that, and in a joking tone, he said something like, "Oh, I have a bit on the side," which no one really questioned. It's so sad when we start to dive a little deeper into the children, especially when we start to learn about the drastic differences between the upstairs and downstairs kids. For the upstairs kids, who are referred to as the children that were left at the doorstep, they grew up relatively normal under the care of their grandmother. I don't really want to include Joseph into that sentence because they all lived under the same household. As for the downstairs kids, Elizabeth did her absolute best to give them the most normal life she could under their horrific circumstances. Though there were no books, she watched adventure films with them on the little tiny television that they had and made up stories about princesses and pirates. Their mother taught them some of reading and writing, though Elizabeth herself lost much of her own knowledge in her childhood because of the years of sexual abuse. Police photographs showed how Elizabeth tried her hardest to decorate the rooms for her children, such as painting little yellow snails with green shells on the grimy bathroom walls, or drawings of flowers or stickers of the stars and the sun that were found on the walls. On April 19, 2008, Kirsten got very sick, and Elizabeth begged Joseph repeatedly to take her to the hospital. By then, Kirsten was 19, and surprisingly, Joseph reluctantly agreed to take her to the hospital. Elizabeth had slipped a secret, desperate note into her daughter's pocket, telling doctors that she had given her cough medicine and aspirin. The note said, "Please, please help her. Kirsten is really terrified of people. She's never been in a hospital." She wrote, adding a one-line message for her daughter, "Kirsten, please stay strong until we see each other again." Upon reading the note, the doctors immediately made a TV appeal for her mother to come forward. And when Elizabeth saw it, she ordered Fritzl to take her, and he did, surprisingly, accompanying her on the journey that would lead to his arrest in the hospital grounds, and the end of her nightmare. As soon as this case hit the media, it had a huge impact on society. It was a crime that was just so hard to believe. And by the end of the Josef Fritzl's trial, he was charged with rape, deprivation of liberty, coercion, enslavement, and incest. And on March 19th of 2009, Fritzl was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for 15 years on the charge for the murder of Alexander's twin brother, who died 3 days after birth, a male twin, who died in 1996, and according to the charge sheet, Fritzl failed to get medical help for the baby even though he, quote, knew the life-threatening situation of the newborn. He admitted to police he had burnt the baby's corpse in an incinerator, and in September of 2021, a decision was made to release Fritzl from a psychiatric detention facility to a regular prison where he was to continue to serve his life sentence. That decision was based on a psychiatric report which said he no longer posed any danger. The ruling was appealed, and in late April 2022, a panel of 3 judges decided that Josef could be moved. The decision was based on a supplementary psychiatric report submitted in March. However, a court ruled that he will remain in the psychiatric facility until an appeal to the higher regional court in Vienna is heard. There are reports that he is suffering from dementia, and the move to a regular prison means that Fritzl, who received a life sentence, will be eligible for parole this year, 2023, having served the initial 15 years of his sentence. And during his trial, he spoke of his harsh upbringing with his mother and how his mother despised him and would often call him Satan and refused to give him any attention. It also showed that he had already had a criminal background with the rape of one random woman years prior to the birth of his daughter, Elizabeth. And another crazy side note, which is not really talked about in depth in articles that I've read, but it's the fact that he apparently kept his own mother captive in the attic of his home for possibly about 20 years. He told people his mother passed away, but he kept her captive in order to take revenge out on her for all she did to him. But there's really no details on that specific aspect of the case. Today, Elizabeth Fritzl lives under a new identity in a secret Austrian village known only as Village X. The home is under constant CCTV surveillance and police patrol every corner. The family doesn't allow interviews anywhere within their walls and decline to give any themselves. Though she is now in her mid-50s, the last photo taken of her was when she was just 16 years old. And keep in mind, she was held captive from the age of 18 until the age of 42. Kirsten was reunited with her family on June 8th of 2008 when she was awakened from her artificially induced coma. Doctors said that she would make a full recovery. It was revealed that Elizabeth and her children were more traumatized than previously thought. Kirsten would frequently tear out clumps of her own hair, and it was reported she would shred her dresses before stuffing them in the toilets. And Stefan, he couldn't really walk properly because of his height, which he was 5'8", but he had been forced to stoop in a 5'6" cellar. It has also been revealed that normal everyday occurrences such as the dimming of lights or the closing of doors plunged Kirsten and Stefan into anxiety and panic attacks. The other 3 of Elizabeth's children, who were raised by their father/grandfather, are being treated for anger and resentment at the events. Elizabeth and her mother, Rosemarie, are said to have wept for hours together, with Rosemarie saying over and over, "I'm so sorry, I had no idea." After their initial delights at seeing the sun for the first time and riding in cars, Stefan and Felix tend to clamber back into the dark confines of a special container set up in the clinic to help them adjust to life outside. Felix often crawls in there and sits humming an unknown melody to himself, and police believed that this song was a song his mother would sing him to sleep. All the children had been going through extensive therapy, and honestly, even till this day, we can only pray that they learn to cope with and eventually heal from everything that they've been through.
This is the house that no one knew what to do with. It was here in the cellar that Josef Fritzl kept his daughter Elisabeth captive for 24 years. She gave birth to 7 of his children there. It was where one of them, a baby, died. Now, 5 years after the case first came to light, a decision has been taken to fill the cellar with cement. The work will take up to 2 weeks. Austrian officials say it's to prevent anyone from going into the cellar again.
We try to suppress anyone from entering the estate or even the cellar. That is absolutely not possible anymore.
At his trial in 2009, Josef Fritzl was found guilty of murder by neglect, rape, incest and enslavement. Now 78 years old, he's serving a life sentence. Elisabeth and her children were given new identities. Local officials say there are plans to sell the property once the cellar has been filled in.
Well, guys, we made it through another case, and with no necklaces breaking this time. Leave a comment below if you've seen this movie, and if so, what were your thoughts on the movie compared to this true crime case. Thank you guys again for taking time out of your day to dive into another true crime case that has inspired the making of movies. Please leave your thoughts and comments below, and also like and subscribe. I'll see you guys back here for another episode of Crime and Wine next week.